And then we're gonna say ah, like we stubbed our toe. Ah. Yes, you've got it. The Beaux-Arts style came over from France. And how can you recognize it? Well, it's got a lot of Greek influence. Look at these Corinthian columns near the front door. And it's got a lot of fancy stonework. You can see those intricately carved griffins. The griffin is the symbol of London. And so, perfect for the London Guarantee and Accident building. Whenever you see a building that looks like it's from the 1920s, it's got fancy stonework and some Greek influence, that's probably the style of, say it with me, Beaux-Arts. Yes, indeed. All right, so that's our first style. Now, let's look to the right. This is a more modern building. You could probably guess its name. This is the Trump International Hotel and Tower. It's the second tallest building in all of Chicago. But it was designed by the guy who designed the tallest building in the world. That's Adrian Smith. What's the tallest building in the world? The Burj Khalifa, my people behind me knew. It is out in Dubai. How tall is it? Well, look at the top of Trump Tower and imagine if there was another Trump Tower on top. It's tall. Oh boy. All right. So let's get into our next architectural style. Now this is sometimes known as the international style or black box modernism. To our right is a work by someone whose name you'll hear a lot. Ludwig von Mies van der Rohe. He came over from Germany in the 1930s and started teaching architecture at the Illinois Institute of Technology. He would inspire generations of architects who would go out to build in Chicago. He had this whole philosophy of less is more. He liked how skyscrapers looked as they were being built before we covered them on the outside with stone. So in the 1920s and 30s, he was designing buildings that looked like that, which back then was revolutionary. He was all about this less is more philosophy. But his student, Bertrand Goldberg, who built right here next to him, disagreed with his philosophy. He said, Mies, you know, big black boxes, less is more, that's nice. But there are no right angles in nature, so there shouldn't be any in architecture. So he built the very wavy Marina City Towers in the 1960s. And it's said that after Bertrand Goldberg built these buildings next to his mentor's building, they never spoke again. Now, fun thing about Marina City Towers, back in the day, our river was really nasty, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later. But our river was so nasty that until the 1960s, no one wanted to live here. So Marina City Towers back there had to be built self-sufficiently, since they were the first residences built on the river since the days of when we were polluting the river. And so they had their own roller rink, they had their own grocery stores, and the House of Blues behind them used to be their movie theater. They also had an office building built with them. And of course they had a marina. A city within a city, Marina City. But Chicagoans call them the corn cobs, and if you look back, you'll see why. Oh, all right. Now, as we are going down the river, to our right, this is what our river used to look like. So to our right here, we've got an old warehouse. It was a warehouse for the Monarch Foods Company. Back when our river was polluted, we mostly had warehouses around here, and a lot of them were built out of brick. A good reason to use brick is it's made of clay, and guess what's at the bottom of our river? Clay. So we could rebuild our city with materials from our very own river. Terracotta, bricks, and stuff like that. So this building is a great example of the architecture that you would have seen as we were rebuilding the city. That one went up in 1914. Okay, now let's switch to modern day. These days, a lot of buildings are, grappling with kind of our clean energy crisis. We want to get cleaner, we want to be better to the environment, and this building to our right is helping to lead the charge. And I say lead because they've actually won a LEED certification. That stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. They've reached the platinum level, which is the highest possible level. That building there is cooled by river water, not air conditioning. They bring the river water and circulate it through the building. It comes out a little bit cleaner, actually, and a little bit warmer. So they said, you guys could do that, but if everyone did that, then our water would get too hot for the 72 species of fish swimming around beneath us. These days, we've done a great effort to re-establish a good environment for fish in our river, because it used to be really nasty, but we've cleaned it up a lot. Now we've got 72 species of fish. And some of those fish actually ended up in the basement of this building to your right when a tunnel underneath the river was accidentally punctured in 1992. This building's the Merchandise Mart. This building went up at the end of the 1920s, and it's a new style of architecture we get to learn. Art Deco. How can you recognize Art Deco? Well, look for bold geometric patterns like those diamonds around the front. Look for lines that lead your eye upward. And at the top of the building, look for parts that are set back from the rest. You can see up at the top, there's some that are pushed back. Those are called setbacks. The Merchandise Mart, Art Deco. So, what is the Merchandise Mart? Well, when it was built, it was a warehouse for the catalog company Marshall Fields. But today, it's showrooms for the tech and merchandise industry, so we wouldn't shop there, but the shops we shop at would shop there. All right, to our right, this is Wolf Point. Wolf Point here is, it's a historic spot. It's got 3 towers on it right now. On the right side, we got Wolf Point East. In the middle, we've got Salesforce Tower, and just behind Salesforce is Wolf Point West. But I really want to tell you about Wolf Point, because this is kind of where Chicago got rolling. We got our first 3 taverns built here. We had our first ferry across the river right here. Fun fact, Chicago had 3 taverns before building a church or a school. We had, specific priorities. And in these taverns, we actually got our name, as the Native Americans and the colonial settlers were mixing together, and the Native Americans were calling this area Chicago. We said, that sounds awesome. We're going to name our city after that. But you know what Chicago meant? Stinky onions. Yeah, we named the whole dang city after stinky onions because we were built on top of a swamp, and what grew in the swamp? Stinky onions, so that's our name. We're also built partially on prairie land, and a main thing you gotta know about a prairie is it's flat, which makes it perfect for building railroads. We became, during the Industrial Revolution, the railway capital of the nation. But the trains have caused some problems for architects, like the architects that built this building to our right. This is 150 North Riverside. On this side is the river. On the other side, beneath the street, are train tracks, so they couldn't build a full foundation. How the heck did they build a building that tall on a base just slightly wider than this boat? Well, up top they've got what's called a water sloshing mass damper system. You can't see it from out here, but up in the top of the building are 4 giant tanks of water. They hold us 160 gallons between the 4 of them, and every time the wind blows the building in one direction, the water sloshes in the other direction. It counteracts the swaying of the building. But get ready, because that's not even the wildest thing that architects have done to avoid these underground trains. To our right, we've got 100 North Riverside. 100 North Riverside on its south end, so right now we're facing south. On its south end, they have switch tracks underneath the sidewalk. So the switch tracks are so big, they couldn't build any foundation under the south end of their building. So what did they do? Well, look at how these last 5 columns here, they connect to something up on the roof. When we get underneath this next bridge, I want you to look back at that part of the roof. What you're going to see is giant X's. These X's are called trusses. They are holding the entire weight of that end of the building from the top of the building because they couldn't build a foundation. So in theory, if you dug under the south end of the building, you could wave your hand right under it because there's nothing down there holding it up. It's all hanging off those trusses on the top. Wild. Now to our right, this is actually the first building to be built on top of the railroads on this side of the river. This is 2 North Riverside Plaza. This building was built at the end of the 1920s. We can of course see some Art Deco styling. It's got a lot of setbacks up there, got a lot of bold geometric lines. And this building was the first public plaza in Chicago. It opened at the end of the 1920s, right as the Great Depression hit. You could come here and catch a concert, which was great because people were really depressed, the Great Depression. Okay, now off to our right. This building looks like a building we've seen before. Do we remember what style this is? Right, black box modernism, or the industrial style, the international style. Mies van der Rohe brought this over and started teaching this to architecture students at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Some of his students would go on to join firms like Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, who designed these buildings to our right. So we see a lot of Mies van der Rohe's influence here. Underneath these buildings are where the trains are. You can even see one right now. These trains are really loud, so they had to insulate these buildings really well. I talked to a guy who actually works in one of these buildings. He said that the buildings are so well insulated, you can't hear the trains anywhere in the building, except one bathroom on the 16th floor. He says he doesn't know why you can hear them from in there, but it's the only place in the building that you can. These buildings are Gateway Center 1 and Gateway Center 2, built in the 1960s when we were seeing a lot of black box modernism because there was a lot of Mies van der Rohe's influence in our city at this point. But around the 1970s, I think we had tired of building black boxes. So for Gateway Center 3, we said, what if we build a white box? And so here comes Gateway Center 3. This one would be a big black box, except they've clad it on the outside with white concrete panels. So 1960s, lots of black boxes. 1970s, we kind of changed it up a bit. But at this point, we had done it all with boxes. We had built black ones and white ones. Now we said, hey, it's time to think outside the box. So for the 1980s, we get a new style of architecture. You ready? Contextualism. Just behind me, off to the right, there's a building that curves. That building is curving with the river. Its surroundings, or its context, informs the way it's built. So its surroundings or context is the river. And so when the river curves, the building curves. That's contextualism, looking good in your context. And now it's time for us to turn. And as we turn, you're gonna see it. It will be dead ahead of us in a moment. The tallest building in Chicago at 1,454 feet tall, not including the two antennas on the top, which add another 300 feet. It's the Sears, or Willis, Tower. All right, so you might be like, wait a minute, who's Willis? Willis Insurance Agency is the insurance agency that bought this building. They also insured the Titanic, which I'm sure was a big payoff for them. Now, this building had an interesting problem when it was being built. The problem that Bruce Graham, the architect, and Dr. Fazler Khan, the structural engineer, had to basically tackle is how were they going to build the tallest building in the world, which this was, starting in 1974, and it held that title for 20 years. They were like, how are we going to build the tallest building in the world on a swamp like Chicago? And here is the answer to that question. First, if you want to build a building that tall, you got to dig down. Chicago is built on top of dirt, and then we've got clay, and then we've got hard pan, which is hardened clay. And then we've got bedrock. The bedrock is really sturdy. It sits about 80 feet below the surface of Chicago. So to build up, you gotta dig down to the bedrock. So they dug down through 80 feet of soil, clay, and hard pan, and then they hit the bedrock, and then they dug another 60 feet into the bedrock and planted what's called caissons. Caissons are basically, you take a giant hunk of a metal called rebar, and you put it into this big hole that you've dug in the bedrock. And then you fill concrete into the hole to hold the rebar steady, and the rebar becomes the legs of the building. You build the rest of the structure around that. But even that was not enough to keep a building as tall as the Sears Tower from swaying all over the place. So they said, okay, here's what we'll do. Bruce Graham, he took out a box of cigarettes, and he said, here's my idea. He pulled up one cigarette, and then he pulled up other cigarettes around it. Basically, his idea was if you stick just one stick in the ground, you could easily push it over. It's not very sturdy. But think about if you stick a stick in the ground and then you surround it with smaller sticks that support it. It becomes a lot harder to push over, right? So that is the theory that they used to build the building. If you catch another glimpse of the Sears Tower, you'll notice it's not just one tower. It's actually 9 different towers bundled together. That is called bundled tubular construction. You know, you take a bunch of tubes, you bundle them together. And that is how you build the tallest building in the world on a swamp. But even with all that, the Sears Tower still sways 18 inches in any given direction on a windy day, which is intentional. If it didn't sway, the steel would be under so much stress that it might start to warp, bend, or snap. And so they allowed it to be able to sway a little bit to keep the stress off the steel. How do we know that it sways? Well, if you go up there to the sky deck, which by the way, for my thrill seekers, you can go up on a glass deck at the top of the Sears Tower and look straight down to the street below, if you want the scariest view in Chicago. That building, if you're in the bathroom up there, on a windy day, you might see the water sloshing back and forth in the toilet bowls. So that's how we know it sways. Okay, sometimes you have a problem that's not how do we build the tallest building in the world on a swamp? Sometimes you have an easier problem to solve. The problem at this place on the right, the Mercantile Exchange, was everyone wanted a corner office. Look at their solution. They built more corners, right? Easy. Architects, they confront a lot of different problems. Now, let's talk about a style of architecture we've already seen. Coming up to our right, you're going to see the Civic Opera Building. The Civic Opera Building was built at the end of the 1920s. It has, look at this little triangle roof down here. This is called a pediment. It's Greek. So we've got Greek influence. We have intricate stonework from the 1920s. What style is this? Beaux-Arts, yes indeed. All right, so we've got our opera building. This building has housed our opera for over 100 years. And it was funded with money from a stock trader named Samuel Insull. Samuel Insull, it's said, had a secret girlfriend, and she was an opera singer, but she didn't make it in New York, so supposedly he built her this building, but then she didn't make it in Chicago either. I know, right? And then get this, Samuel Insull, the stock trader, lost everything when the stocks crashed at the start of the Great Depression. So, moral of that story is make sure you have a backup plan. To our right, this building was built in the 80s by Gesh and Partners, but I want to direct your attention to these wavy silver panels down near the riverside. These wavy silver panels are actually the architects of this building giving a nod to the people who built the building they had to knock down. Back in the 50s, there was a building with wavy silver panels on the outside sitting right on this land. When they built this building in the 80s, they had to knock that building down, but they kept those wavy silver panels to decorate the side of the river to kind of, pay homage to the building that they had to destroy to build this new one. So pretty cool how architects like each other's work. Okay, are you ready for something really historic? Yes? Okay, let's look to the right. Oh, there's Starbucks. That's not it. Right next to Starbucks, where this building's covered in ivy, this is where our first ever theater was in Chicago. And right near it was the first ever inn in Chicago, the Saguenay Hotel. But maybe the most historic thing that happened here was there used to be a building called the Wigwam, which was a temporary building built for the 1860 Republican National Convention. And at that convention, a young lawyer would receive the presidential nomination in 1860. Who was he? Lincoln, yeah, Abraham Lincoln got his presidential nomination right there. Pretty cool. Now, if you want some really nice riverside dining, by the way, beatnik down there, they've got a riverside bar. If you go in and you try to get a seat, they're going to try and seat you upstairs, but ask to go downstairs so you can see the river. All right, now to the right, we've got the start of our river walk. Our river walk is hugely... No, that sentence won't work. All right. It's largely thanks to this guy named Montgomery Ward. So Montgomery Ward, he was a catalog man. If you think about Amazon today, we used to have that in a book called a catalog, and you would select stuff from inside and then you would order it. So Montgomery Ward was like the Jeff Bezos of yesteryear, and he was so rich that he spent his money suing people who were building on the riverfront and lakefront in Chicago. He said, no, the waterways should be open to the public. And thanks to his fights, they eventually made laws banning people from building too close to the river or to the lake. So, thanks Montgomery Ward. And now, we can run along the lakeside. We can sit in those cool Adirondack chairs. Those are all free if you want to come down here later. And right behind the start of our river walk, there's a building that curves with the river. What style of architecture is that? Contextualism, right, from the 80s. This building is 333 West Wacker, but you might know it better as Ferris Bueller's dad's office, because that's where he works in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. All right, so a lot of buildings around here are clad in turquoise glass. The turquoise glass is supposed to mimic the color of our river, but our river's not always this color. What color is it in March? Green, exactly. And what color is the dye that we use? Orange. Yeah, isn't that weird? So the orange dye was given by the Plumbers Union. The Plumbers Union used to dump orange dye into pipes that ran underneath the river to see where they were leaking. Wherever the river was bright green, there's the leak. And we saw that and said, hey, can you guys dye our river green every year for St. Patrick's Day? And they said, yes, but we're not going to tell you what's in our dye. It's our little secrets. So they have a secret dye. They say it's made of vegetables, so it's not going to harm the fish, and that's, that makes us feel safe about putting it in the river. And so every year on St. Patrick's Day, they dye the river green. Pretty cool. Now, speaking of green, if you look to the right now, you'll see green boxes of plants floating in the water. That area is called the jetty, and those are fish hotels where fish come to spawn, and then the park district teaches people to fish off the jetty. To our right, we have got the Builders Building. This is a neat little building. On the left, we've got intricate stonework, Greek influence, the style it is. Beaux-Arts, right? From France, we've got that style from the 1920s, but then on the right, we've got a more modern style from the 1980s. In this one building, you can see how architecture changed in 60 years. They built the first part in the 20s, added on in the 80s. Okay, now here we go. To our right, we've got a building with bold geometry, and the middle is set back. What style is it? Art Deco, yes indeed. That building is in the style of Art Deco, which came about in the 1920s. There was a law made saying, hey, if your building's a certain height, you actually have to set part of it back to allow more natural light down into the city. Another great reason to set the middle of your building back like they did is they've now got these two arms on this building kind of reaching out, and on either side of those arms you can open up a window so that you can get a cross breeze, which was great back then when there was no air conditioning. Now here's some more modern styles. To our right we've got a postmodern building. This building takes a lot of classical influence. At the bottom you can see two Greek pediments, and then you can see an arch which is very Roman. But they built the building primarily out of stone and glass, which are kind of more modern materials, especially the glass. And so whenever you see classical influence with modern materials, that is postmodern. And to the left of it, we got 55 West Wacker, which is in the style of brutalism. Brutalism. It's not called that because it looks like it's going to beat you up. It's actually called that because of béton brut, which in French means raw concrete. It's a raw concrete building, brutalism. Now to our right, this is 35 West Wacker. This building has mullions on the outside on its windows. That's those silver things. Those reflect more natural light into the building, helping them save on electricity costs. And what are they doing in that building? Well, inside that building is the Leo Burnett ad agency. You don't know you know them, but they invented Tony the Tiger, Snap, Crackle, and Pop, and the Meow Mix theme song. That one. Pretty fun. To our right, look at this silver thing underneath the bridge. It's called an eyelash. Think about what your eyelashes do for your eye. They keep stuff from falling in it, right? Those eyelashes keep pieces of the bridge from falling onto people walking below. Okay. Now off our right bow, so a little ahead of us, a little to the right, behind Morton's the Steakhouse, there's a building topped with gold. That building is the Carbide and Carbon building. It is Art Deco in style. And when it went up at 1929, it was going up right in the middle of Prohibition, and it was designed to look like a champagne bottle. That's what Chicago was up to during Prohibition. But we also were building buildings like this one to our right, which you'll be able to see when we come out under this bridge. To our right, we've got a building that has 4 domes in the middle and 1 dome at the top. That building's the Jewelers Building. That building to your right was built with safety in mind. Imagine if you're a jeweler in 1926 Chicago. You want to get to your office in the Jewelers Building, but when you step out on the streets with bags of jewels in your hands, what's going to happen? You're going to be robbed or mugged or something. So to keep these jewelers safe, they put a car elevator in that building. You could drive into it, go up in your car, and then you go to your office, and you never set foot on the street. Nice and safe. And another safety measure was those 4 domes in the middle. Those used to hold giant tanks of water. In case we ever had another big fire, they were going to break those tanks, douse the building in water to keep it from catching fire during any other big fires that we had. But luckily we never had to use those giant tanks of water, so they removed them. Okay, now to the left, the beautiful Wrigley Building. This one's actually Spanish Revival. It's meant to look like cathedrals out in Spain. It's built with terracotta on the outside, which is a great material for us in the 1920s to be using to rebuild our city because number one, it's fire resistant, yay, and number two, it's made of clay. Where did we get that clay? The river, exactly. Now the Wrigley building, when I say Wrigley, you might be thinking, oh yeah, like Wrigley Field. Exactly. You might be thinking like Wrigley chewing gum. Yes. And maybe if you know your history, you're thinking, oh, like Wrigley soap. Are you guys not thinking about the soap? That's actually where Wrigley started, selling soap door to door. But no one really was buying the soap, so they started adding in freebies like a stick of gum. And people liked that a lot better, so they pivoted. To our left, you can see a beautiful neo-Gothic building. That's the Tribune Tower. How can you tell it's neo-Gothic? Well, it's got flying buttresses. Up at the top, those little towers connected to arches connected to the main tower, those are buttressing or supporting the main tower. They are flying buttresses. Cool. A lot of applause over there. Guess they're doing a good job. To our right, behind these brown brick buildings, you can see a white building rising up into the sky. That's the Aon Center, formerly the Standard Oil building. It's the fourth tallest building in Chicago. When it was built, it was clad in beautiful, imported, white, Italian Carrara marble. Everybody go, wow. I know, that's what everyone was saying. Until 10 years later, the marble, because of the cold, cold Chicago winters, it started to crack and fall off the building. So at the cost of $80 million, they replaced all of that white marble with white North Carolina granite. So yeah, you just can't take marble for granted. What have they done with all that marble? Well, they've ground it up into gravel, which is now around the Standard Oil building. So they just have gravel made of beautiful imported white marble. Everybody say wow. Amazing. All right. Now, coming up to our right, we're going to look for, it's going to be behind a couple buildings, but we're looking for a building with wavy white balconies. Let's see if we can spot it as it comes out from behind the James Hardy building. There it is, Aqua. Aqua is a building designed by a Chicago architect named Jeannie Gang. Jeannie Gang is really inspired by water. She wanted this building to look as if water was falling down the side of it. It's supposed to look kind of like water cascading. If you look at how the glass is arranged, it really does kind of look like that. And those wavy white balconies are supposed to represent the white rocky outcroppings along the Great Lakes. So aqua, of course, meaning water. This building is very water inspired. Now Jeannie Gang, she loves building wavy buildings, so see if you can spot another one of her buildings to our right. You can see the very wavy St. Regis Tower, the third tallest tower in Chicago. But it's actually the tallest building in the world ever designed by a female architect. Yeah, that's our girl, Jeannie Gang. Now, of course, this building is actually 3 different buildings, and they're all kind of bundled together. Do we remember what that's called? Yeah, bundled tubular construction, right? You bundle tubes together, they're a lot stronger than they would be on their own. So that's one way that they keep that building from swaying. But look at the 83rd floor. Something up there is missing. The whole floor. That's because this building has to contend with wind speeds up to 120 miles per hour up there. So to keep the building from swaying in the wind, not only have they bundled it together with other towers, but they also created a blow-through. Up there is a place where the wind blows through the building instead of hitting it head on. That is why the 83rd floor is missing. So the building won't sway. All right, we've been talking about this turquoise glass and about the color of the river, but let me tell you about a time when our river was nasty and brown. Back in the days of early Chicago, in kind of the 1800s, end of the 1800s, we were dumping a bunch of stuff in our river. We were dumping human waste, we were dumping waste from the Union stockyards, chemical waste. It was gross. And no one wanted to live down here. Until we said we need to do something about our gross river. What we could do is we could reverse the flow of the river. Now we would start taking clean water from the lake and sending it down the river nice and clean. So we said, yeah, we'll do that. We'll reverse the entire flow of the Chicago River. So we did. We dug a canal called the Sanitary and Ship Canal. It was between our river and the Des Plaines River across the Continental Divide. A lot of people were trying to stop us from doing this because we were about to make our nasty problems someone else's problem. One moment. This is Lakeshore Drive Bridge, so it's very loud. All right, so in the dead of night, I must stress this, in the dead of night, in January of 1900, we opened this canal. Why did we do it in the dead of night? So no one could stop us. We opened the canal, and suddenly we've done it. We reversed the flow of the Chicago River. Our nasty water is now flowing down through the canal into the Des Plaines and south to St. Louis. Yeah, so they sued us. But we fought the court case in Chicago, so guess who won? We won. And then we got sued again. This time we got sued by Canada, Wisconsin, and Michigan. They said, Chicago, you're taking water from the lake now, and you're going to drain Lake Michigan. We actually lost that court case, so we had to come up with a solution. Our solution is here off our bow. You can see there's a couple boats sitting there behind a set of doors. That's actually the Chicago Harbor Lock. It forms a doorway between our river and the lock and the lake. So this doorway is normally closed, but when boats need to go through it, it opens up. So you go through the first set of doors into the lock, they close the doors behind you, then they open the doors to the lake, and almost 1 million gallons of lake water fills into the lock, raising your boat 4 feet to the height of the lake, and then a horn blows and you go out onto the lake. And when you come back, they do it all in reverse, like they're doing for those boats now. You might be wondering, Jay, doesn't that mean that lake water will still get into the river? Is that going to be a problem? The good news is no. At the same rate as we are taking water from the lake, rain is falling in the lake and replenishing it. So at this rate, we're never going to drain Lake Michigan. Yay! And as we turn, you're going to get the best view on this whole tour. So check it out off our left side. I'll give you some time to take some photos, and I'll be back once we're fully turned around and headed back. Questions at this time, please feel free to come and ask me. I'm here to talk to you. That bird we keep seeing, by the way,